Hi, friends. Welcome back. I always, I lost my train of thought. Sorry. I'm going to start it again.
It's okay. Like, welcome back. Oh, frick. What do I do now?
Welcome back. I don't know where to go from this point. Welcome to TikTok Theology, a podcast that tackles the major trending topics on social media that concern the Christian faith. I'm Megan.
And I'm Steven. We know you can't form a theology in 3 minutes or less, but those videos can identify current issues. TikTok will give us the prompt, and then we'll do a deep dive. Thanks for joining us in this exploration.
Hi, friends. Welcome back on the final episode of Season 3.
Last one.
We did it. We finally made it to the end. And we're kind of wrapping up this season by answering a question: how political should pastors get from the pulpit?
Yeah.
And we think it kind of fits really well with the theme of the kind of subtle theme that has been permeating throughout this season, especially because we've been in an election season. We've been in an election year. And because we take a lot of our topics from social media, and these are the conversations that are being had.
It's important for people right now.
Yeah, like everything's had a little bit of a political undertone in a sense. We are dropping this episode a few days early because we know Tuesday is election day.
Election day.
So that's going to be a big one. And we do think that maybe this conversation should be had a few days before that. Because we know everyone's already decided probably where they're going to vote and who they're going to vote for. But this was kind of on our hearts that this is a conversation that we should be having. It might be something that's food for thought for how we should be handling ourselves the next election season.
Especially as Christians too, because, you know, this is not how people should vote, but like, this is how political should pastors get at the pulpit. So like it's asking a question of the church and addressing the church in a political season, which is a little different than just saying straight up, you know, like vote for this person, vote for that person.
And I think that we've seen this kind of conversation happen on social media, whether I've seen it a lot with even like pastors/Christian influencers get asked these questions a lot. There have been like viral videos that have gone of somebody who filmed a pastor in church or something and who's having this conversation about who they should vote for. They're making very public statements about who they feel like they would vote for. And then even the more, I think, dangerous side, which is who is the Christian vote? Who's the Christian candidate? Who Christians should vote for? Who God would want in office? And I think that we've seen controversies of like churches that host political rallies or welcome all kinds of different candidates into their space to like share. And this is a both side thing. This is not just a specific one side or the other. I've seen
nationalist Christians seem to be doing it more, but it is both sides.
When there is that intricate tie between Christianity and politics and Americanized politics in certain churches. But there's been a lot of response, a lot of critique from Christians and non-Christians alike about how politically involved churches have become, or certain churches have become, because not all of them. But and so I think that in the protection of our witness as Christians, we think that this is a really important conversation to be having to make sure that everything that we're representing as the capital C church, as the body of Christ, is actually representing who Jesus would be in situations like this.
Yeah. You know, and hear this often. You hear Christians say this, students, just other people in general, and they say it in a kind of a defeatist way that like, oh, we just have to choose the lesser of two evils. Right. And honestly, in a sense, that's true.
Yeah.
This sounds, people would be like defending, like, no, only one side. Nope. Think about it. You're not saying that the people are evil, right? So like whatever candidate it is, this candidate, can be a Christian or claim to be a Christian or whatever. We'll take them at their word, right? So we're not saying that they are evil. Just like any other person, they could have things that are good, but then they also have done things that are wrong or whatever. Just like any person that they're all working through their own lives of holiness and whatnot. So we're not saying that an individual is evil. Yeah. But if you think about it, if Republicans and Democrats are both different political factions in Babylon, then it is. Because if Babylon is the antithetical worldly government that is not the kingdom of God, then these are leaders within Babylon.
Yes.
So whatever party you're voting for, you actually are voting for the lesser of two evils. Yes. And so I think that's an important thing to say, because often we'll try to act like one party is evil and then the other party is righteous or good or like God ordained or something like that. Both parties have a whole bunch of junk about them that are wrong.
Oh, yeah. Government, period, is just so corrupt at this point.
But both parties also have things that are good, that are actually, they line up with our biblical characteristics. Both parties do that.
Both do, yes.
And so we were just talking a little bit before this. We were talking with some colleagues, and we were reflecting on this one blog, the Substack that we were reading.
Yeah.
And they were making the judgment that people get more conservative if they're in the church. But the way they're talking about conservative is totally politicized in a weirdly merged way.
Yeah.
What they're actually meaning is people are more concerned about holiness when they're in the church. Think about that. Holiness is not equivalent to conservatism.
Great.
And justice is not equivalent to liberalism.
Yeah.
Those are not equivalent. Okay? So thinking that one party has more moral uprightness and the other party has more social uprightness, whatever, we can think of it whatever we want, and those might be the elements of that party that make it, better in certain respects than others or whatever. Yeah. But those things are not right. God calls us to be both holy and gracious people that seek justice. That means you're left and right. Better than saying you're left and right, it means you're neither.
Yeah.
And that's actually really, really appropriate. I had this pastor say this a bunch of times, and we've heard different sentiments of this. You've probably seen shirts and stuff. But it's like, I don't serve the donkey or the elephant. I serve the lamb. Yeah. But that is true, because Jesus is not going to be a Democrat or a Republican.
Right. All
those shirts that have Jesus toting guns and Republican stuff or whatever, like those are just straight up blasphemous.
Yeah.
100% blasphemous. Okay? And if you think Jesus can tote around the things of the Democratic Party, also blasphemous. He won't do that. Yeah. He will not do that.
Right.
He is neither of these. They are factions within a Babylonian government. Yeah. Keep that in your mind, because if people don't think that, then they start baptizing their party and thinking that that's the will of God and all this kind of junk, and that's how you start getting Christian nationalisms and all sorts of stuff like that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? The one aspect of the separation of church and state that is absolutely crucial is not that, now the church doesn't get funding, blah, 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 that kind of junk. I'm not even worried about that.
Yeah.
You don't want the state to enter the church. You don't want that reversal.
Right.
The kingdom of God is the kingdom of God. The church is a reflection of it.
Yeah.
And you don't want classical liberal influences coming into the church, whether they're Republican or Democrat, neither of these, because they are factions of Babylon.
Right.
I think that's just a very, very important starting point.
100%.
So I guess the question is, can we get some guidance from the Bible on this? There's no Democratic Party or Republican Party in the Bible.
Correct.
These things do not exist. But we do see Jesus caring about politics in certain ways. Now, the term politics, when you're referring to the polis of like a group of people, well, then we are political people in the fact that we are communally oriented but that's not really the way people are using the term politics, right? They're talking about pandering and playing games and trying to get people elected and stuff like that.
Right.
So I think for convenience, we're going to talk politics in that kind of negative sense. And then we will talk about public engagement as what polis and politics actually means, but we'll use it like that. So the difference between a public engagement and a political engagement for our purposes here is that, okay?
Perfect.
So we'll see that Jesus is very, very concerned about public engagement, but not super concerned about political engagement in that sense.
Yeah.
Right? But some people will say that give to Caesar's what is Caesar's. Like when Jesus said that, the story where somebody brought Jesus a coin and said, hey, do we tithe? And it was basically this double bind. They were trying to entrap him to either saying hey, if you need to pay taxes to Caesar. And if you do, then they'll go back to the Jews and say, this guy is a shill for Rome. He's trying to tell you to pay Rome. And if you said don't, then they'll go back to Rome and say, hey, this guy's trying to avoid taxes and he's a rebel against Rome.
Yeah.
So he's trying to entrap Jesus. But what Jesus ended up saying was, whose image is on this? And they were like, Caesar's. And he was like, well, give to Caesar's what is Caesar's, give to God what is God's. So some people interpret that passage as Jesus saying, don't get politically involved.
Okay.
Right? Or publicly involved. Just separate them, no involvement. But I don't know if that's right.
I don't know if that's right either.
I don't know if that's right.
I don't know if that speaks to me.
No, you know what I mean? That doesn't seem to have the ring of truth.
Yeah, I think that is a little bit of an extreme interpretation of that verse. Because I feel like give to Caesar's what is Caesar's becoming a whole political ideology in and of itself is one of those pet peeves of mine.
Yeah.
Whenever people take one or two verses and then they try and build a whole ology of it.
Whole ology.
A whole ology, whether it's a theology or whatever. Where it's like, know. I don't know if I would take that verse and build the whole.
Yeah, I think we got to take it a little more nuanced.
Yeah. So how shall we take it more nuanced?
So for one, we can think about how did the Jews respond
To that.
to Roman occupation?
Yeah.
And there's various groups of that. And then was Jesus part of any of these groups?
Right.
So first one we all know about. We all have hate relationships with. We don't even have love-hate. We just like...
A regular hate.
Yeah, we just want to like slap around. Is the Pharisees. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Now the Pharisees, they're given a little bit of bad rap.
Yeah, for what they were trying to do, and
They were trying to keep holiness and trying to follow rules. My associate pastor was preaching this week, and she was making that point. And they're trying to, install holiness in the land. Yeah. But as we know, they're super fundamentalist in certain respects in their day, and they're judgmental as heck. Right? So the Pharisees were the most important group in this Jewish society. They were seen as spiritual fathers. They believed in the oral law that God gave Moses at Sinai along with the Torah. So they believed in the first 5 books of the Bible, but then anything else that God gave them, right? Mm-hmm. The Torah was basically akin to, we would say, the U.S. Constitution in the sense that it is set down a series of laws that were open to interpretation.
Yeah.
Obviously, we know...
In that comparison.
In
no other way.
No, because the Torah is not sheerly a political document.
Correct.
But it does contain the political document of the Jewish people as well. Mm-hmm. Yeah. The afterlife, they believed, existed, and that God punished the wicked and rewarded the righteous in the world to come. Mm-hmm. So that's very standard in most thought, and that's why it was dominant then, and it's dominant now, right?
Yeah.
Right. And they believed that a Messiah would come and herald in a world of peace. Again, standard. Most people held to that. Okay, so there's a second group called the Sadducees, and they were this elitist group. They're rich people that wanted to maintain the priestly caste, but they were liberal in willingness to incorporate Hellenism into their lives. Yeah. So nothing classical liberalism. We're not talking about that. They're basically progressive or something. They're trying to Hellenize. Yeah. Get Greek-oriented in there. And so they rejected the idea of the oral law and insisted that the literal interpretation of the written law was all they could really use, right? And so they did not believe in an afterlife either because it was not mentioned in the Torah. Mm-hmm. It was written in other passages. Yeah. This group disappeared around 70 after the destruction of the Second Temple, and none of the writings of the Sadducees survived. And basically, these two parties, the Pharisees and the Sadducees, served in the Sanhedrin. Which is basically like the Jewish Supreme Court, to make an analogy. You know what I'm saying?
To make these comparisons for the team.
Yeah, but like the comparisons aren't super helpful.
He said Stephen is crying every time he makes these comparisons. Oh, he's physically icking and cringing really hard. But for the sake of having this conversation, they are very important comparisons that we're making for a final point.
Exactly.
Not literal. Please, for the love of all that's good and holy, don't make these literal comparisons.
Okay, so the Jewish Supreme Court, or the Sanhedrin, was made up of 71 members who interpret the laws. Most of them were Pharisees, but there was a good constituency of Sadducees in there too. So the final group would be called the Essenes, okay? And so they emerged out of a disgust of the other two groups.
Oh, wow.
You know what I mean?
Almost like I've seen that before.
We know this. The comparisons are not equal or fair, but you can see reflections of this in today's governance.
There is nothing new under the sun.
There's nothing new under the sun.
There's nothing new. No. We've been doing this.
Exactly. And so they basically believed the others had corrupted the city and the temple, both. And so they moved out of Jerusalem and lived a monastic life in the desert, adopting a strict dietary laws and a commitment to celibacy. So they were like pre-monks, right?
There you go.
Of the Christian monks. And they possibly wrote the Dead Sea Scrolls that were found in the Qumran in 1947. Comparatively speaking, they would be like...
Your local Green Party.
not even, because they're like very, very separatist. So they'd be like Amish or something.
The Amish.
Yeah. Okay. Like, because they're super separatist from society. Like, they went off into caves and stuff. And then the Pharisees and the Sadducees, we could say they're like, you can say there's right wing and left wing ideology. It's not fair to call them nationalists or anything like that. Like, they're not really like that at all. But you can see this
very like baseline comparison.
Jesus rejected many of the tenets of all of these groups.
Correct.
So was he a separatist? Nope.
No.
He wasn't an Essene. He didn't go off into caves and be by himself.
Correct.
He wasn't a Pharisee,
he
condemned the heck out of them, even though he held closest to their ideology.
Correct.
Like the literal resurrection and all that kind of stuff. He didn't deal a lot with the Sadducees, but like they just were like, the Sadducees like almost like didn't care that much. The Pharisees were the ones who were really upset with Jesus' ministry. And so there's the question. Jesus doesn't fit under any of those.
Any of the, quote, political groups.
The political groups of his own day.
Yeah.
So why would we think he fits as a Republican or a Democrat today?
Correct. Well, even like he came, and when Jesus was around these parts, he was intentional about being someone who didn't come as was expected.
Right.
Like, was intentional about demonstrating the fact that he was not who the Jewish people expected, the Pharisees expected. He was intentional about separating what he was called to preach from what had been preached up until that point by being like, that you say this, and this, and I say this, and, the whole monologue, the whole Sermon on the Mount. And so I think that that's really important to point out is like, I would argue that Jesus came to not, and like obviously cares about the heart of the political issue.
Yes.
Like he came and he addressed and cared about the heart of what the Pharisees and the Sadducees and the Essenes like cared about, but didn't engage in the political aspect of it.
It was the public and not the politics in the way we're defining it.
He was very public about what he believed, and he was very public about what God had, the mission that God had given him,
and how to follow God,
in Babylon. For our favorite verbiage this whole season. But he refused to engage in any political.
He didn't play their games.
No, he didn't. He was completely public about what he believed. But refused to engage in politics. And I think that
is a crucial model for us.
The crucial model.
Right.
100%. Because if Jesus showed up today, do you think that, I don't think he would be a member of any party, because that's the point. He's not going to the RNC or the DNC. Because that's the point. Like, I feel like politics and like parties has become so corrupted and so like innately human and fallen that if he were to come, we would just get the same, like today, we would just get the same thing of like, hey, you say this, I say this. Like he would it would just be the same thing again.
Exactly.
Because he's still not playing a political game.
And think about it. Like the Pharisees weren't 100% wrong. You know what I mean? They were wrong on a whole bunch of stuff, but they weren't 100% wrong. They were affirmed in a lot of ways in their readings of passages and stuff like that. In the same way, our political parties are not 100% wrong. They're not.
Right, neither of them are.
Neither of them are 100% wrong.
Right.
But they're wrong in a lot of ways. But what they're doing is they're playing the politics of Babylon.
Yes.
Just like they did back then.
Correct.
And so this is crucial because when we start thinking about our political arena and stuff like that, it's easy to say, I serve the lamb and not the elephant or the donkey. But like, what does that mean? It means you better not be gung-ho
for either side
about a Babylonian government.
Right.
You better not deify them. You better not make that integral to your faith.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean you don't engage publicly. We must engage publicly.
Correct.
We're supposed to be a witness in this world, which is a much more difficult concept. And I think let's get to that real quick because you brought up the Sermon on the Mount, and that's, I think, super duper appropriate.
Yeah.
Because Jesus gave us principles, and this is Gushee and Stassen do this in their book called Kingdom Ethics. They talk about this, which is really good. They say that we can look at three principles, the principles of salt, light, and deeds that are talked about in the Sermon on the Mount, and they tell us how to engage publicly, right? And again, the appropriate word politically, if we look at it as polis, then that is, but that's not how most people are looking at it.
No.
So saltiness. Saltiness entails being an alternative community that's different from the world and not conformed in the world. So when we know this, like when salt loses saltiness, you just put it on the ground and stuff like that, because that's what they would have done, Salt does a bunch of things. It preserves food, right? It preserves things back then when they didn't have refrigeration systems. And it also gives flavor and taste into what it is.
Yep.
And so this analogy is really important. When you're an alternative community, you're supposed to be different. You're supposed to add flavor. You're supposed to preserve the things that are good. You're supposed to be this, right?
Almost like the church should be that.
The church should be salty. Instead, it's salty in the wrong way.
There you go.
You know what I mean?
Be salty, not salty.
Yeah. You gotta say it with an inflection. Be salty, not salty. There you go.
And if that don't clear it up, I don't know how. I don't know how else I could be clearer about that.
That's it, man.
Yeah.
That's it.
That's good.
We nailed that.
Perfect.
So, okay. The second one is light. Now, light is being a caring community that does not withdraw from the world, but instead serves the whole of human family.
The whole.
Because it's light.
The entirety.
Light shines on everybody, right? So here, beckoning outsiders and weary ones, we're bringing light to dark places inhabited by outcasts and the wretched of the earth, all that.
Yeah.
Think about that. What does light function as? It illuminates dark places. When things are dark, they're scary. We don't know what's going on. We're filled with fear because we don't know what's lurking behind the shadows and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Light illuminates those places, makes you lose your fear, right? I did this one sermon example when I was a youth pastor. I thought it was pretty dope. This is a cool example.
You're like, I think about it sometimes still because it was so good.
Youth pastors out there, y'all can steal this if you want. Okay. I was at a church in Florida and it had a massive basement. Very unheard of. And the reason why is because this church was on a big lake. And so it actually had the ability to do that. Floridians don't really have basements at all.
Yeah, neither do Californians, so I get it.
Yeah. But this was randomly had one. And it's a big old basement. We made it look like a music venue and we used to do shows and stuff. It was super cool. Yeah, it was super cool. And we called it the Underground.
Of course.
Yeah, because it's cool.
Because cool.
So one day I was doing youth and I had everybody, my youth group, and it was about 25 students or something like that. And we were up ground, not in the underground. And
above ground, if you
above
will.
Ground. We were on sea level. And I was like real hush hush and like making it real serious and getting people like really interested in what's happening. I was like, all right, guys, I want y'all to hold it, keep it down. We're gonna do something special. And they're like, what? I was like, you're gonna go down to the basement. It's gonna be dark. But, use the rails as you're going down and be quiet. Don't say a word. And when you're down there, sit wherever you like. And then we'll start. So they all went single file down there, one by one.
Get them.
And then they sat down. I had the whole place dark and it got super dark because it was like an underground basement.
Underground, yeah.
And I put this one candle in the middle of the room. That is the only light that was in there. So it's just one little burning candle. When they got in, I like slowly turned on the lights and I was like, look around, look where you guys are sitting. All of them were huddled around the candle, except for one little weird guy that was like, that was kind of like off in the corner. Like this little dude was just like, what? But everybody was huddled around the candle. And I was like, this is a sermon analogy. People are attracted to light.
Yeah.
It illuminates dark places. When you are the actual light of the world, people will be attracted to that.
Yeah.
You get warmth when it's cold. You see in the dark places. We're called to be that. And I think people mess up royally right here.
Yeah.
Because what they think they are supposed to do, they think their calling is to make the world conducive to light.
Yeah.
But that's not our calling.
No.
Our calling is to be light.
Correct.
In the dark places. The darker the place, the more they need light.
Yeah.
Stop thinking about how to make Babylon conducive for the gospel. But think about how to be a bearer of the good news in this place.
Yeah.
How to be the light.
Well, even the politicizing, like how polarizing it's become to be either one side or the other. I feel like even Christians on both sides have almost adopted this mindset that like if you are of an alternative political belief, you don't even deserve to have that light.
Yeah.
There's a demonizing of people who believe something different than you.
Yeah.
And so they're like, oh, well, you don't even deserve that because you're voting such and such.
Or that they think there's no possible way you can be that.
Or a condemning of fellow believers, fellow Christians because of a
because they
different
voted
political
on
view.
One Babylonian view instead of the other.
Instead of the other. And I think that is such a tactic of the enemy to
so
create the
divisive,
that divisive nature in the church. Because if he can divide the people of God, that's a huge win for him.
It is.
And so I feel like politics, unfortunately, has become a huge
dividing
tool
point
of division that the enemy has used in the lives of the church 100%. And in Christians.
Yep. The last one of these is deeds. And so this is where I think it's so important to not talk about, oh, the right is holy and the left is justice oriented. Because then you might think of deeds as being justice oriented and progressive or leftist. But being a disciple-making community means that you're living out Christ's actual commands. Jesus never only preached. He also fed and healed and helped people everywhere he went.
Yeah.
Those two things were intricately tied together in every facet of Jesus' ministry.
Yeah.
And it wasn't Jesus' liberal side versus his side that spoke the truth. Get the heck out of here with this junk. Get the heck out of here with this junk.
Yeah.
I hope listeners can start seeing the foolishness of applying political ideologies into what Jesus was doing.
Yeah.
Man, it's crazy. Look, when we prop up particular parties from the pulpit, you're baptizing a Babylonian state. You're letting it seep into Jesus. You can't imagine, and I know Preston Sprinkle talked about this, you can never imagine Jesus promoting Caesar.
No.
Or any of the senators or anything like that. You can't imagine that, right?
Yeah.
Or like vouching for a particular Pharisee to make the Sanhedrin.
Yeah.
Like you can't fathom that.
Yeah, it's not conducive with who we know Jesus to be.
So think about that. So that kind of brings us to our final point, which is the question of the topic here. How political should pastors get then? So I think the first thing we would say is don't prop up Babylonian leaders.
Yeah.
That's, I think, crucial. Jesus wouldn't do it. Don't do it yourself.
Yeah, especially pastors hold a specific calling and they have an anointing and they are leaders in the church. That comes with a very, very strict judgment. It comes with a very high calling of way of life because you're leading other believers. You're leading other Christians. It's the ministry that you've been called to. And I feel like there needs to be a very, very specific submission to Jesus.
Yeah.
And not a promotion of their own personal beliefs or their own personal, especially when it's political, especially when it's these kind of things, because your job is to lead people closer to Jesus.
Yes.
And if in any way you as a pastor or a leader are leading people away from Jesus, that you're responsible for that. You will be held accountable for those things that you do. And so I think that there needs to be, like, before any pastor runs to a pulpit and is like, this is either A, who I'm voting for, B, who we should all be voting for, C, how Jesus interacts with these specific parties, whatever. Oh, I think we need to be so careful before we state those kinds of things publicly.
Look, we're trying to help make disciples of Jesus Christ, not disciples of Trump or Harris.
Correct.
That you just got to say it. We just have to say it.
Yeah.
We are not making disciples of those two.
No, we're not.
But of Jesus Christ. And also, not of yourself. And so sometimes when people like they wrap their political ideology up to their own ministry and teaching and stuff like that, then are you making a disciple of Christ or a disciple of you?
Yeah.
So think about those kind of things. I promise you, I don't even know how you're going to vote, Megan. And it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying be private about it. Don't talk to people about it. You can say whatever you want. We're talking about from the pulpit.
Yeah.
We're talking about pastors, that pastoral integrity.
Correct.
You know what I mean? You can have conversations about it. But my point making about this is like how insignificant it actually is to our calling as Christians in this world.
Yeah.
Look, you are called to be light regardless of who it becomes. Half of the country is going to be depressed on Tuesday.
Yeah.
So now pastors should have a even bigger thing to look at because your congregation, half of them might be upset. How do you lead them and guide them in that? Because that's the actual question, right? Look, you are called to be a Christian. You are called to be a follower of Christ no matter what. So don't endorse a politician. Don't endorse a Babylonian. Don't do that junk publicly from the stage.
Correct.
You're going to have your own thing and you have relations with people. Also, pastors need to be aware of their influence and aware of their understanding.
Yes.
And so, like you said, they need to be they are held to a higher account. So don't just like flippantly say stuff.
Oh yeah.
Because people are going to be listening very clearly about what you're saying. Give people freedom and space. If they ask you, be like, all right, this is how I'm voting. I'm not telling you how to vote. Okay, this is how I'm voting and this is why. Yeah. But I want you to pray about it and think about it yourself. Give people that space that you have to do that.
Because it's very unlikely that your church will have everyone that aligns to one political party. Yeah. So there's somebody in that room if you endorse a candidate.
You're going to disenfranchise.
Exactly. Who has been either hurt or confused or whatever, if you're equating your Christianity with this specific
and what's worse, that's what causes a ton of people to leave the church when junk like that happens.
Agreed.
This is like one of the biggest points of deconstruction, and rightly so, because you are creating something that's not Christianity
Correct.
anymore.
I would agree.
You know what I mean? Okay, so how do we then talk about the responsibility that we do have to lead the people as pastors? Like if you're pastoring a church, you do have a responsibility. So I would say, talk about...
If it were me.
Yeah, if it was me, talk about how to be Christ given whatever the new situation is.
Yeah.
How do you be Christ in this world? That is it.
Yeah.
because you're asking how to be light, how to be, salt, how to show the good deeds. Like, how can you be Christ in a Trump administration? How can you be Christ in a Harris administration? Because that's the only question.
Yeah.
Right? Because both of them require you to be light. Both of them require you to be salt.
Yeah.
And the world is always going to have challenges. So how can you be salt and light in the midst of it? You know what I mean? There's an example. I was at a church and the pastor came up and he said this. This is a big church, right after Roe versus Wade was overturned. Mm-hmm. And I thought he did such a good job on this. And he was like, before he even started, he was like, all right, guys, I just want to talk to you guys. We have this situation, probably feeling a lot of different emotions right now.
Yeah.
Because in some ways, this is a good thing because we are promoters of life. But in other ways, this is a bad thing because how many women now feel like they have no future and feel like they have rights taken away from them? And this is the reality of the world we live in. This is the reality of the public of what they're going through. So he was saying to the church, don't be braggadocious about stuff. And then look at how to help people where they're at, even in this situation. Because for some people, that was a massive loss. And for some people, it was a great win.
Yeah.
And so don't think about that. Don't brag and put it in people's face or anything like that. Mm-hmm. But think about those people that are hurting. How can you help them in this new situation that we're in now?
Yeah.
And he was like, the church needs to be leading the front on helping these women see a future when they see like it's been taken away.
Yeah.
And I thought that was a really, really good way to approach it because what he was doing was not saying whether it was good or bad. He actually said ultimately, things of life are good. He did say that, but he didn't talk about it in any kind of demonizing way. And he talked about it in the sense of now my people need to be led. Mm. If I'm their shepherd, I need to lead them. And what you need to lead them here is how to be a loving, gracious presence in this world, non-anxious, not hurting people, right?
Right.
What do you think of that?
I mean, I think that's really important. I think that you can have so many sermons and conversations from the pulpit about what is a biblical value. Neither of us are sitting here telling you that you shouldn't value the things that God values,
right,
and not vote in accordance with those things.
Yeah.
No one's telling you to do that.
Right.
But instead of maybe if you were a pastor and taking the pulpit, instead of being like, I'm going to vote so-and-so on election day, if you have a sermon series talking about the important political issues and you really go in and you research the hot topics and then you present a biblical view on them and let people sift through for themselves. Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, how am I going to act now that I know that these things reflect the heart of God?
Right.
I feel like that is so much more effective than saying, oh, you should vote for this candidate because I'm voting for this candidate, especially because a lot of people equate the voice of their pastor
as the voice of God.
As the voice of God.
Yeah.
For better or for worse, there are a lot of people who, if their pastor says something to them, that is what they need to be doing.
Yeah.
And so if we are pastors and leaders, we need to be really encouraging people to seek the Lord for themselves, for what he has called them to do and live and vote and align and all these things. And your job is to just point back to scripture, point back to the Lord, point back to what God says about things.
Lead and be disciples. That's
exactly. And which I love the example about your pastor where it's like we can hold to a sanctity of life viewpoint
without demonizing
people. And we can hold to the value of all people and the dignity of human life while also deeply empathizing and supporting women who have either thought about it, gone through with it, all that kind of stuff. Like there has to be both. And that's why I think sermons about that could be really effective.
His wasn't even a sermon. His was
but I'm saying if they took that.
Right. But I think this is a good point too. He didn't do a whole sermon on it. He just did like 7 minutes at the beginning of a service because something monumental just happened in the world.
Yeah.
And I think that's important. Like churches should not ignore what's going on in the world at all. Agreed. Like people need leading and guidance.
Yeah.
People need guidance. And so take that 7-8 minutes, and just be like...
And address the hard thing.
In a loving, gracious, godly way.
Yeah.
That's not partisan.
Yeah.
It's not Babylonian.
Yeah.
Man, your people need that.
And believe us, we are praying for all of the pastors and leaders who will take the pulpit on Sunday after we find out the election results on Tuesday and Wednesday. And we'll have to deal with the fallout.
How do you offer solace and guidance to show people how to be Christ in this new administration, whichever one it is?
And then how do we, if you are a pastor and your candidate lost, how can you take the pulpit and say, but we've still been called to submit to leadership. We've still been called to respect the government that we're a part of. We've still been called. How do we make sure that as pastors and leaders, we are able to lead well when we feel like our candidate won.
Yeah.
And when we feel like our candidate lost.
Important.
Because that's
it.
That's it.
So I want to leave with this little, bringing it back to the give to Caesar's what is Caesar's, right? There's an implication on it. He said, whose image is on this coin? Caesar's. Well, give to Caesar's what is Caesar's. And then he said, give to God what is God's.
Yeah.
Why was it Caesar's?
Face.
Because it bore his image. The implication is, if you're going to give God what is God's, you're going to give him what bears his image. And who bears the image of God?
We do.
We do. That gets exactly to the heart of the issue. Jesus took that and said, this is not political, but this is public.
Yeah.
It's about people.
Correct.
And that's what God cares about. So I want to encourage you guys to go, whether on Tuesday is going to be a good day or a bad day for you, let that not matter.
Yeah.
Let what matters is you showing your people, if you're a pastor, how to be Christ, regardless of the situation.
Yeah.
And then if you are a churchgoer or a Christian, a congregant, and you just had this really bad news and you might be experiencing dread because your person didn't win or whatever, remember that God is still calling you to be on mission.
Yeah.
The mission might change a little bit, but you are still called. That's the main thing to think about.
Yeah.
And that would be keeping, following the lamb instead of the elephant or the donkey, I think. Well, that's it for season 3.
We did it.
How about it?
How about it? A good last mic drop episode before we leave you all for the next couple of months.
Yeah. We'll be back. I think last time we came back in March, so probably around there again.
Yeah,
March 2025, somewhere around there.
2025. That sounds
maybe February.
so
I don't know.
old. That's
yeah,
crazy.
Doesn't it seem like so far away?
Shiver my timbers.
2025. All right. Well, we'll see you guys next year.
Yeah, we will.
This episode, just like the other ones, was brought to you by the School of Theology and Ministry at Life Pacific University. We'll see you next time.
See ya.